Where Season 1 of Miami Vice feels like a film finding its shape, Season 2 feels like a sequel that knows exactly what it is extending. If you're joining us from Episode 1, you know the gamble paid off. This time around, we'll be looking at what followed. By the time Season 2 of Miami Vice arrived, the experiment was no longer theoretical. Season 1 had proven that television could behave like cinema. Season 2 would test whether it could sustain it. The colors got brighter, the music got louder, the ambition got riskier. And for the first time, Miami Vice had real momentum behind it. It's a fact that Season 1 made noise, but not in the way networks usually measure success. It wasn't an immediate ratings juggernaut. It didn't even crack the top 30 most seen TV series for the 1984-1985 season. What it did do was lodge itself into culture. A lot of people didn't discover Miami Vice when it first aired. They found it later, through summer reruns. Watching episodes back-to-back made the show's rhythm and atmosphere clearer. That's when it clicked, not as a weekly procedural, but as something closer to a long-form mood piece. NBC could have course-corrected. Instead, they doubled down. By the summer of 1985, the industry had caught on. 15 Emmy nominations followed, including Outstanding Drama Series, music recognition for Jan Hammer, and acting nods for Don Johnson and Edward James Olmos. Olmos' win for Lieutenant Castillo mattered in particular because it validated something crucial. Even at its most stylized, the show still had dramatic gravity. That recognition raised an obvious question for Michael Mann and Anthony Yerkovich. How do you follow a season that didn't quite fit the system but somehow worked anyway? The answer wasn't reinvention, it was discipline. Season 2 doesn't change the show's language, it sharpens it. Same structure, same aesthetic rules, same refusal to soften its edges. The difference is confidence. Whereas Season 1 feels like a series trying to find its zone, Season 2 knows exactly what it needs to do. And this set of episodes works because the characters finally start absorbing the cost of the world they live in. Sonny Crockett changes, not dramatically but noticeably. The detachment of Season 1 gives way to cracks, moments where the persona slips. In the episode Back in the World, when his Vietnam past resurfaces, it's not played for plot, it's played for wariness. Don Johnson lets the performance breathe in a way the first season rarely allowed. The relationship between Crockett and Castillo deepens as well. The first season established contrast. The second created tension. Castillo's stillness and Crockett's emotional volatility aren't just aesthetic opposites anymore. They're philosophical ones. You can feel the mutual respect, but also the friction. Neither man is entirely convinced the other one is right. That attention to inner life spreads outward. Tubbs' past resurfaces in The Prodigal Son. Swiatek and Zito are allowed darker instincts and fill the shell. Bushido opens the door into Castillo's private code of honor. Even secondary characters are given space to matter. What really didn't change was the structure. Episodes still orbited drug trafficking, arms deals, and money laundering. Crockett and Tubbs still go undercover. Wins are still temporary. The sense of futility grows stronger. The message is clear. This is a war that can't be won, only endured. And that tension becomes one of Season's 2 defining features. The show stops pretending that effort leads to resolution. By the time the show's sophomore run went into production, Miami Vice wasn't just a creative risk anymore. It was a machine that had to keep running. Success didn't simplify the process, it complicated it. The show's aesthetic rules, the color bands, the music-driven edits, the location shooting, weren't loosened. They were enforced more aggressively. Every episode had to look like Miami Vice, even when the story didn't naturally demand it. That required coordination across departments that television production simply wasn't built for at the time. Schedules tightened, budgets stretched, Music licensing became both a creative asset and a logistical nightmare. Editing rooms weren't just assembling scenes anymore. They were composing rhythm. This is where season 2 becomes interesting behind the scenes. Because Miami Vice is now trying to behave like cinema on a weekly deadline. Those same deadlines forcing cinematic precision also stripped away television's traditional safety nets. There's no room for neat resolutions, no reset button optimism, no guarantee that effort leads to clarity. What replaces them is accumulation. Damage that doesn't clear once the credits roll. The second season isn't darker because it wants to be. It's darker because the system no longer allows escape. And that tension seeps into the work. You can feel it in the pacing. Scenes linger longer. Silence is used more deliberately. Violence becomes less explosive and more unsettling. The show isn't just stylized. It's controlled. But control has a cost. The pressure to deliver spectacle, mood, and meaning every single week started to weigh on the storytelling. Not every episode can carry that burden equally. Some sag under it. Others rise because of it. The 1985-1986 season lives in that space where ambition and exhaustion begin to overlap. The show also started to expand outward. Guest casting became bolder but rarely frivolous. Standalone musical guests amplified this. Kiss frontman Gene Simmons as drug dealer Newton Windsor, jazz legend Miles Davis as the enigmatic pimp Ivory Jones, pop star Fiona as a murderous prostitute, hard rock icon Ted Nugent as a psychotic killer, Frank Zappa as a vengeful drug lord, folk star Leonard Cohen as Interpol agent Francois Zolan, and Phil Collins as a shady game show host. Musicians weren't just cameos. They're folded into the texture of the world. The show understands that image, sound, and performance are part of the same language. At the same time, future stars pass through quietly, without fanfare. Actors who would later become household names appear in roles that feel grounded, not stunt-driven. Even public figures wander in and out, reinforcing the sense that Miami Vice occupies a strange space between fiction and pop culture. As you can guess by now, music became even more central. By this point, the show isn't just using songs to heighten scenes. It's getting scenes around the music. Rhythm dictates editing. Mood dictates pacing. The official soundtrack album of the show topped Billboard charts, and that wasn't an accident. It was the byproduct of a show treating sound as narrative architecture. Young Hammer's compositions, especially Crockett's theme, evolve into emotional shorthand. Pop tracks don't comment on scenes. They define them. It's no surprise that rival networks try to copy the surface elements. Neon, suits, pop songs. What they missed was the underlying discipline. Miami Vice wasn't stylish because it wanted to be cool. It was stylish because it believed television could carry meaning the same way cinema did. That distinction is why the imitators collapsed almost immediately. And by this point, something subtle but important happened. Style stopped being the headline. The suits are still immaculate. The lighting is still aggressive. The music is still front-loaded. But the show no longer pauses to show you these things. It assumes you're already fluent. And that's a crucial shift. Season 1 often announces its aesthetic, but Season 2 operates inside it, which means the style can now be used against the characters. Bright colors frame ugly outcomes. Beautiful locations host moral collapse. Music doesn't elevate moments. It sometimes traps them. This is where Miami Vice starts to feel colder. Not less emotional, more resigned. The show stops flirting with glamour and starts interrogating it. Criminals aren't romanticized. Undercover work doesn't offer catharsis. And victories don't reset the board. The tonal hardening is why Season 2 feels heavier, even when it looks sleeker. It's also why the best episodes that year don't just impress, they unsettle. The lower end of the following ranking isn't about skill or ambition. It's about emotional aftershock. These are the episodes that don't need to announce themselves loudly, because the damage they leave behind does the talking. It's at this point that the show is confident enough to end stories without relief, without catharsis, without the promise that things will feel better next week. This change is important because it tells you the show has stopped chasing impact and started trusting accumulation. At number 5, we find Sons and Lovers. As the season finale, Sons and Lovers does something Miami Vice was getting increasingly confident in doing, letting emotional payoff outweigh scale. The return of Calderon as son gives Tubbs a chance to confront unfinished business, and the episode leans into that story rather than rushing into it. There's a sense of inevitability hanging over the story, reinforced by the music. Roger Daltrey's After the Fire doesn't comment on the action, but it frames it. What makes this ending land is how the story closes, but the emotional temperature doesn't drop. Miami Vice refuses the idea that closure equals peace, and that restraint becomes one of Season 2's defining traits. At number 4, we find Trust Fund Pirates. I think this is one of Season 2's and the overall show's sharpest social episodes. On the surface, it's a fairly straightforward undercover story, but beneath that, it's quietly vicious in how it depicts wealth, boredom, and entitlement. These aren't criminals driven by desperation. They're thrill seekers, treating violence like a hobby. The yacht sequence set to Randy Newman's Miami represents the show's classic brand of irony. Sunlight, luxury, and casual cruelty sharing the same frame. It's one of those moments where the show's aesthetics works against the characters, exposing them rather than glamorizing them. This episode only works because the show had already earned its authority. Had it been released in Season 1, this might have felt glib. Here, it feels accusatory. This middle stretch of rankings is where Season 2 really shows its hand. These are episodes that don't care about escalation, but rather control. This is Miami Vice fully fluent in its own language, image, music, silence, and pacing, and using that fluency with restraint. Nothing here is rushed. Nothing is overexplained. The show understands that discomfort can be more powerful than clarity, and that withholding information can say more than dialogue ever could. This episode is where Miami Vice stops behaving like a television series trying to impress you and starts behaving like a filmmaker who trusts you to sit with uncertainty. At number 3, definitely Miami. If Season 2 is about control, definitely Miami is where you see that control fully expressed. This episode is remembered for its visuals, and rightly so. But what elevates it is the emotional restraint. Crockett is pulled into a situation that feels intimate and dangerous at the same time, and the show lets discomfort do the heavy lifting. That sequence, scored by Godley and Cream's Scribe, is Miami Vice at its purest. No exposition, minimal dialogue, just image, rhythm, and implication working in sync. It's not flashy editing, it's deliberate construction. It's also a great example of the show's restraint becoming its sharpest weapon. And discomfort is again the point. In the runner-up position, we find Out Where the Buses Don't Run. This is the episode people point to when they want proof that Miami Vice had real emotional depth. And they're right. What makes this story so unsettling isn't the crime itself, but the obsession surrounding it. The retired cop at the center of the episode is a ghost of what Crockett and Tubbs could become, a man trapped by a version of the truth that no longer exists. The slow, methodical pacing is crucial here. The show resists urgency. It allows dread to accumulate, and when in dire straits Brothers in Arms finally arrives, it feels natural rather than manipulative. The episode doesn't ask whether the retired cop is right. It asks what happens when belief outlives evidence. And that's a far darker question. And finally, topping the list, The Prodigal Son. If Season 1's pilot announced what Miami Vice could be, The Prodigal Son declares what it is. The scope immediately expands. Miami, New York, Colombia. The drug war stops feeling local and starts feeling systemic. This is the show thinking globally, thematically, and geographically. The guest cast is stacked but never distracting. Everyone feels integrated into the world. And then there's Glenn Frey's You Belong to the City, a track that doesn't decorate the episode, but defines it. More than anything, this entry announces the show now understands scale, especially at an emotional level. The consequences are no longer contained. Bigger stories, longer shadows, higher emotional stakes. This is Miami Vice no longer testing its voice, but using it with confidence. Season 2 of Miami Vice doesn't change the rules established in the first year. It proves they were sustainable. This is the season where the show stops asking whether television can behave like cinema and starts operating as if the question had already been answered. What followed is no longer an experiment, it's a commitment. And commitments are harder to maintain than experiments. Season 2 is where Miami Vice proves its willingness to pay that price. The following season will ask a different question. Not whether Miami Vice can sustain its identity, but how long novelty itself can hold before change becomes necessary. And whether the show moved to answer that question sooner than it needed to.